So, a couple weeks back, LeBron James went on his podcast with Steve Nash and talked about how ring culture was bad for the game and the conversation about the game. And depending on who you are and who your GOAT is, right, you might be able to spin that in whatever way you want to take it. But overall, I kind of agree with LeBron. And I actually think LeBron is a great example of this in a very strange way. When you think about it, LeBron is considered top 2 all time. At worst, maybe you have him top 3 all time. And he's been in the NBA for 21 years, yet he only has 4 rings, right? Only. But the idea that the second greatest player of all time could be in the NBA and not win a championship 17 of those 21 years kind of lets you know how much it takes to actually win a championship. How good you have to be, how lucky you have to be, etc., etc., etc. But after LeBron said this, people again are going to take what he said and run with it for their benefit. It came to Tracy McGrady and Gilbert Arenas. And I'm not going to lie to you, I did not watch the full podcast or show or whatever it was, but it came down pretty much to them saying that if they played with Shaq, they would have won rings as well, right? I don't know how it always gets back to Kobe, but it always gets back to Kobe. And I'm not going to put any malice on them in their words, right? As a Kobe fan, I kind of want to do that. I kind of want to be offended, but I have no reason to believe that T-Mac is a Kobe hater. I feel like T-Mac would probably tell Kobe this to his face if he was alive, right? So I'm not going to put any ill will toward T-Mac. And Gilbert Arenas, I feel like, has shown Kobe a ton of love over the years, right? Even before Kobe passed. So as much as I want to, say, man, they're hating, I'm not going to do that, right? They're just having a basketball conversation, same way I am having a basketball conversation right now. And who am I to tell them that they couldn't have been or shouldn't feel that way, right? Even when someone like Paul Pierce says he feels like he was better than D Wade, and if he played with Shaq and if he played with LeBron, he would have 3 rings as well, right? A lot of players have these feelings. Who are we to tell them they're wrong? Because in a lot of cases, we don't really know what could have happened, right? If someone like Paul George, right? Because Paul George says some kind of delusional things, but in this case, it wouldn't be delusional, right? If Paul George says, you know what, man, if I joined the 73-9 win team, I would have got 2 rings as well. That's probably true. Doesn't mean he was better than Kevin Durant, but I'm getting a little bit sidetracked here. So do I believe that T-Mac could have won a championship with Shaq? Of course. Of course he could have won a championship. Do I believe they would have three-peated? No. Do I believe that he would have had what it took mentally to push Shaq? No. Do I believe he would have willed his team the same way Kobe did? No. Do I believe he had the same fire and energy and intangibles that Kobe did? No, I don't actually. That's not saying he wasn't just as skilled or just as good or whatever way you want to put it. We all know there's more to it than skill. We all know there's more to it than talent. We all know that you have to be lucky to win a championship. Was Kobe extremely fortunate to be paired with Shaq? Absolutely. You also know how difficult it is to be Kobe, to do what Kobe was doing, to fight through everything he had to fight through, to be that next to Shaq, while T-Mac is doing whatever he wants to do in Orlando. No bad shots, nobody to demand the ball from you, all that freedom in Orlando. Kobe is putting up 30 points per game, winning championships next to Shaq. That sounds easy, but it's not easy. We kind of seen an example of this with Kyrie Irving and LeBron James, where not the same situation, not the same type of players, but it's hard to be the full you next to a dominant force like a LeBron James, which I believe was a big part in why Kyrie wanted to leave. Kobe said, I'm gonna be me. To be able to be you in that way next to the best player in the world, I don't think it's easy to do. I don't think many people could have done that mentally or skill-wise. Back to Tracy McGrady and Gilbert Arenas, because I actually don't feel like those guys are who LeBron was actually talking about. Now, Gilbert is kind of his own case, right? In the case of T-Mac, if ring culture was as, harmful and this big of a detriment to the discussion about basketball as people make it out to be, and I agree it is to some extent, but if it was that bad, we would never even talk about T-Mac. Right? Or am I wrong? It's one thing to talk about players that never won a championship. It's a different thing to talk about a player that never won a playoff series. And yet people still love you. People still hold you in very high regard. And if ring culture was so toxic, we would talk about you so differently. Yeah, I hear nothing but positive about Tracy McGrady. Maybe you guys hear differently. I think collectively as a basketball community, we give Tracy McGrady a pass. Never winning a playoff series is absurd. And we can go through it and talk about what happened and how he got unlucky and injuries and all that. But to never win a playoff series and be talked about with the reverence that T-Mac is, kind of shows you how much the ring culture conversation can, I'm not going to say it's not real. It is real, and we'll get into ways that it's real. But I don't feel like it applies to T-Mac. And when LeBron was bringing it up, I don't think he was referring to a player that never won a playoff series. He was referring to players that were winners that couldn't quite win it all. And let's go through it with T-Mac, because T-Mac did get unlucky at times. He got unlucky in the teams he played. Famously, he was up 3-1 on the Pistons, not the finals Pistons, but this was the year before the Pistons beat the Lakers in the finals. So maybe that's a point for T-Mac in saying, if I had Shaq, I would have beat that Pistons team. Who am I to tell him he's wrong? Maybe he would have, right? But he was up 3-1 on the Pistons. And Tracy McGrady was playing amazing basketball to start that series. 43 points in game 1, 46 points in game 2, 29 in game 3, 27 in game 4, up 3-1. And I'm not trying to say he should have won this series. I'm just going through it, right? We're talking about a guy who never won a series. So let's see how it actually happened. And again, he was playing amazing basketball. Then we get to game 6 where he drops 37 points, 11 boards, 5 assists, still playing amazing basketball. But he's 11 for 28 in this game. He's 1 for 6 from 3. Game 7, 7 of 24 from the field, 21 points, 5 boards, 6 assists, and they lose game 7. They blow a 3-1 lead. Of course, this is Doc Rivers as the coach. Once again, they were not supposed to win this series. They were a 42-win team, but they managed to get up 3-1, and Tracy McGrady in the last 2 games did not perform well. And by the way, in those last 2 games, Game 6, Chauncey Billups had 40 points. Game 7, Chauncey Billups had 37 points. And just for a reference, because people are going to compare T-Mac against this Pistons team to Kobe and Shaq against this Pistons team, this was the Pistons before they got Rasheed Wallace and before Tayshaun Prince was a starter. So a different team, right? But still impressive for T-Mac to even take this team to 7 games. And I admitted on the front end that T-Mac had a lot of unfortunate situations, a lot of injuries in his career to himself or to a co-star that prevented him from having maybe a deep championship run. I can admit that. But let's talk about what actually did happen, because he goes to Houston. He now has a co-star, and I think history is going to forget how good Yao Ming actually was. And Yao Ming did later on end up getting hurt. But in this year, 04-05, he meets up with, again, unfortunate, Dirk in the first round. And this series goes 7, and in totality, it might be T-Mac's best series because he shot efficiently. T-Mac was a terrible 3-point shooter in the playoffs, and we could talk about that. But in this series, 30 points, 7 boards, 6 assists, 45% from the field, 37% from 3, 7 games, probably his best overall series. But then we get to game 7, where they lose by 40 points. Now, to be fair to T-Mac, nobody else showed up besides Yao Ming. If you look at the box score, 2 for 9, David Wesley, Scott Padgett, 1 for 6, 2 for 7, Mike James, John Barry, 1 for 6. Nobody showed up. But T-Mac, star player, was 10 for 26, 1 for 7 from 3, while Yao Ming was 13 for 23, 33 points, 10 boards, 5 blocks. It was really just those two. But T-Mac did not meet that moment. Just, it is what it is. Like, these are the opportunities he did actually have. Not to win a championship, but to win a series. So they lose to Dirk in 7. They come back next year and they are playing the Utah Jazz in the first round. And that goes 7 as well. And it would be easy for me to downplay this Utah Jazz team. It was a very good team. A very good team. And I can't point to some specific moment that T-Mac let them down or something, but I will say he put up 25 points, 6 boards, 7 assists, but he shot 39% from the field, shot 25% from 3, and he only shot 73% from the line. And in game 7, they lose by 4 points. He happens to miss 4 free throws in that game. Not, that's just a coincidence, not saying that's why they lost, but 39% from the field, 25% from 3, 73% from the line. And I understand it was a different time. People weren't extremely efficient during this time, but I could say Kobe was more efficient than that during this time in the playoffs. Yao Ming put up 25 and 10 in that series. And then Yao Ming gets hurt the next year going into the playoffs, and they lose to Utah again. And that was pretty much the end of prime T-Mac. So he didn't have a lot of opportunities. He didn't. You lost to a Baron Davis-led Charlotte Hornets team early in your career. Like, that happened. No disrespect to Baron Davis, but Baron Davis put up 25, 9, and 9 on you and beat you in the first round. And my point is not to say T-Mac wasn't that good. I think T-Mac was amazing. I think it's disrespectful that people put T-Mac anywhere close to Vince Carter, right? T-Mac was a far superior player than a Vince Carter. T-Mac was closer to Kobe than to Vince Carter. But my whole point is, like, with T-Mac, we see these stats, we see what happened, we see the points you put up, right? Even if you look at it, T-Mac in Orlando and Houston in the playoffs, if you look at his actual counting stats, crazy. If you look at his 6 playoff series with Orlando and Houston, right? Prime T-Mac, he put up 29 points, 7 boards, 6 assists, a steal and a half, over a block per game. That is crazy. That, like, no one ever denies how great T-Mac was. No one ever does. But he shot 43% from the field, and he shot 30% from 3, and he only shot 75% from the line. But we all accept that. My point is, T-Mac doesn't really fit this ring culture conversation to me. I understand he's probably thinking, like, like I said before, I get why these players feel the way they feel. I get why T-Mac probably in his heart believes he was better than Kobe. A lot of people felt like that at the time. I get why Paul Pierce truly believes he was better than D-Wade. I get that. But in terms of ring culture kind of poisoning the way we talk about basketball, it has never really applied to T-Mac. We don't ever hear people call T-Mac a loser. You know, Melo gets loser more than T-Mac. Even someone like Chris Webber, who was winning 60 games and going to the conference finals, gets loser more than T-Mac. Again, collectively, as a basketball community, we tend to give Tracy McGrady a pass for not winning. Think like we should probably bring it up more that this crazy talented player could never manage to win one single playoff series. And I do believe there's intangibles in that. I do believe there's some leadership in that. Is it unlucky? Yes. But I do believe you got to be able to will your team to a single playoff series win before we start talking about what you would have done in comparison to a 5-time champion. And I'm a Kobe fan, so maybe that's what's coming off here. But to get all the way back to my original point, I don't think LeBron was talking about T-Mac or Gilbert Arenas, guys that truly weren't winners, like truly didn't win anything. I'm not trying to be rude, I'm not trying to be funny, I just don't think that's what he meant. I think he meant the players that went to war, that gave it their all, that managed to beat some of these other all-time greats and just never got over that hump, right? I think that's who he was talking about, not players that never won a single series, right? And I think the perfect example of this, a player that managed to get over the hump and one that didn't, and to me they're very similar because these guys are like truly winners, right? If you look at their history and what they've done in the regular season and in the playoffs, and you know the way they led their team, I'm rambling, let me get to it. But Dirk, right? If Dirk never won that championship, he would have been a victim of the ring culture conversation, because if you look at Dirk and how much winning he actually did, if he never won a championship, people would not consider Dirk a champion. Obviously, didn't win championship, but not consider Dirk a winner. Like, Dirk won 60 games 3 times in the Western Conference during the Shaq and Kobe era, during that great Sacramento Kings team era, obviously during the Spurs era, won 60 games 3 times. And none of those were actually the year he won a championship. Won 57 games that year, won 58 games another year, won 60 games, went to the finals, had to deal with some fishy officiating in that finals, is what it is. Came back the next year, won 67 games, won MVP, lost in the first round, and just still kept on trucking, kept on going. Dirk was a true winner, even with all the L's, right? I think that's the type of player LeBron was talking about. And if Dirk doesn't get that championship, all these great moments, all these 60-win seasons kind of fall by the wayside, right? The fact that he won a championship, now we could kind of talk and laugh about the We Believe Warriors because that was just a part of the journey. If he never won, that would haunt him forever. That would haunt the way we talk about him forever and not talk about him like the winner he actually is. And the other player I feel like fits that category is Chris Paul, the one that didn't win the ring. But if you look at Chris Paul and his career and how much winning he's done, how much elevating of his teammates he's done, how many battles he's been in, how many great playoff series he's had, how many great playoff series wins he's had, and he doesn't get the ring. And I feel like rings might end up being why Chris Paul doesn't get remembered the way he should be remembered. And when you look at Chris Paul in comparison to other guys that I believe he's on their level or a similar level, I don't want to have a debate with you guys, but you look at a Dirk, you look at a Steve Nash, you look at a James Harden, you look at even a Russell Westbrook, these guys all have at least that MVP, that they're going to be remembered because they won MVP. You look at someone like Chris Paul, where he doesn't have the championship, doesn't have the MVP, the assist record being up there on the all-time assist and all-time steals is going to be great for him, going to be great for his legacy. But I don't think 20 years from now, people will remember Chris Paul for how great he actually was. And that, I think that's what LeBron's talking about. So I can get behind the idea that championship or bust mentality as a fan is wrong to a certain, even saying that doesn't sound right, but I can get behind that idea. That just because you weren't a champion or multiple time champion doesn't mean you weren't this all-time great player. I get that. I understand that. I believe that. What I can't do is say winning doesn't matter. And that's what we've done for T-Mac. You didn't? It's okay. You're T-Mac. We understand it. And I'm one of those people. I understand it. I go to bat for T-Mac. I think T-Mac is one of the greatest of all time. And I think most people do. That's what I kind of don't get with the T-Mac thing. No one ever really holds your lack of winning against you. Maybe it's because he's of a different era. Maybe if that happened today, people would be all over it. But again, I think the perfect comparison is Melo, where people really talk about how Melo didn't win much. If we look at Melo's career, and let's not count OKC and Portland, Melo was 3-10 in the playoffs. Didn't win much. But even if you look at Melo, though, it's more, T-Mac lost to Dirk. He lost to that Pistons team. But that Pistons team is not the one we remember, right? That team wasn't the team we think about when we think about that Pistons team, when we think about, prime Tayshaun Prince, when we think about Rasheed Wallace. Those versions of those players were not on that team. But we look at Melo and some of his playoff losses. Again, 3-10 with Denver and New York. 7 of those 10 losses came to Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, Kobe, the Miami Heat Big Three, and the Boston Big Three. 7 of those 10 L's. The other 3 were against a very good Clippers team, Elton Brand-led Clippers team, against Utah, and against the Indiana Pacers, which was his last series in New York. And no one ever really gives Melo the same pass they give T-Mac. And I know you're going to say Melo had a better team. I would agree. I would also take T-Mac over Melo. I feel like most people would. But Melo actually beat a prime Dirk. Melo actually beat a prime Chris Paul. Melo actually beat the Celtics. Now, was it after Ray Allen left and Rondo was hurt? Sure, but Melo got that win. Melo got some wins under his belt. Melo got some W's in there. T-Mac has 0. I don't know why this became an anti-T-Mac video. I love T-Mac. It's not really what I'm trying to do. My point is, the way people talk about T-Mac, the reverence for T-Mac, you would never assume that he never won anything, right? And again, I don't want to downplay the actual point that LeBron was making because I agree with it. I just don't think it applies to T-Mac. Now, for sure, it's going to change going forward now because we're in a different NBA where the rings aren't being hoarded by the same teams, right? 7 different champions, 7 straight years, something that has never happened in the NBA. So it's going to be more, there's going to be more people that win rings, but also more people that don't, in a way, if that makes any sense, right? There's not going to be like these 5-time champions really anymore. I don't think, right? It doesn't seem like that's the way the NBA is going. It can change very quickly, but we might live in a world where Jokic, Giannis only win 1 ring each. And, 5 years ago, that didn't really seem likely, but that's kind of where we are. We might live in a world where Luka never wins a ring. Joel Embiid never wins a ring. And, I think we're going to have no choice but to lean a little bit away from ring culture. We're probably going to have so many players with 1 ring or 0 rings or 2 rings that it's not going to be this big gap like it was before, where players have 5 rings or 4 rings and players have 0. So I think there's going to be less of that, and that might be a positive for the game, that we could talk about the players for what they actually were and not just lean on rings. Because once again, I agree that we talk about rings too much, but it's also the point of the game to win. So that's why I do feel for someone like a Chris Paul who won a lot, but didn't get that ring and won't be remembered as a winner. But when I think of Chris Paul, I think of winner. When I think of Tracy McGrady, I don't think of winner. I just don't think of winner. And I think there's a big difference in that. And I think that's more so what LeBron was talking about. Guys like Karl Malone, guys like Charles Barkley, guys that did a lot of winning in their career but couldn't win the big one, as opposed to a guy that didn't win a single series. I love T-Mac, but that's crazy. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Am I being too harsh on T-Mac, or am I being fair about it? Let me know. Please like, comment, subscribe. It will mean the world to me. On the road to 10,000 subscribers, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm out. Peace.